You were just welding. Chen said it with the casual dismissiveness of someone who'd never worked with his hands. He stood in the middle of his automated shipyard facility, the future of naval construction, he called it, surrounded by robotic welding arms that could work 24/7 without breaks, without error, without complaint. His company had just secured a $2 billion Navy contract to build the next generation of military vessels, and he'd invited journalists, investors, and a few legacy workers to see the revolution in action. This, Marcus gestured at the robots, their arms moving in perfect synchronization, sparks flying in controlled patterns, is what real shipbuilding looks like. Precision, efficiency, speed. In the back of the room, sitting on a folding chair near the exit, was an old man nobody had really noticed. Thomas Murphy, 94 years old, wearing a worn Union jacket with a faded patch that read, Local 6 Shipbuilders, 1942. He'd been invited as a historical guest, a token nod to the shipyard's past before automation made everything obsolete. When Marcus noticed him during the Q&A, perfect optics, he thought, old and new side by side. He'd approach with a microphone and a condescending smile. Sir, I understand you worked in shipyards during World War II. What did you do? Welder, Thomas said quietly. Liberty ships. 1942 to 1945. Marcus's smile widened. Fascinating. And how long did it take you to build a ship back then? 6 months? A year? 18 days, Thomas said. The room went silent. Marcus laughed uncomfortably. 18 days. That's impossible. Even with our robots, we're projecting 14 months for 18 days, Thomas repeated, his weathered hands steady despite his age. November 1942. SS Robert E. Peary. Portland, Oregon. We laid the keel on November 8th, launched on November 12th, fully operational on November 15th. 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes from keel to launch. 7 days total to full operation. Marcus's smile was gone. You were just welding. You couldn't possibly know the full construction timeline. I didn't just weld, Thomas interrupted gently, standing up slowly. I welded every hull plate on that ship. Sections 4 through 9. 847 welds. I know because I counted. Because if even one of my welds failed, 71 men would die in the North Atlantic. So no, Mr. Chen. I wasn't just welding. I was building victory. In the corner, a young engineer, Sarah Kim, 32, Marcus's head of robotics, had frozen. She'd never heard Thomas's story before. But now she was listening. So was Marcus. For the first time, his confidence was shaken. 847 welds. Marcus asked quietly. On one ship? No, Thomas said. Over 2,000 welds on one ship. I worked on 847 ships. From 1942 to 1945. Richmond Shipyard No. 2, California. Sarah leaned forward. Mr. Murphy, how is that possible? 847 ships in 3 years. Thomas smiled sadly. Because we had no other choice. 1941. Thomas began, eyes distant. After Pearl Harbor, America entered the war. 2 fronts. Japan in the Pacific. Germany in Europe. And we needed ships. Desperately. Thomas sat, memories surfacing. The problem was, German U-boats were sinking our merchant ships. Fast. In the Atlantic. Every week, we were losing 10 to 15 ships. Sailors drowning. Supplies lost. Britain starving. And then, Thomas's voice strengthened. The Liberty Ships program began. President Roosevelt said, we will build ships faster than U-boats can sink them. They can destroy, but we will build more. Marcus was taking notes now, skeptical but respectful. But how? How did you build so fast? Standardization, Thomas said. Every Liberty ship was identical. Same design, same dimensions, same parts. So we worked like an assembly line. Like cars. But for ships. Thomas stood, walked to the robots. And welding. Before, ships were built with rivets. Slow. Loud. But welding was fast. Strong. And easy to learn. Sarah asked, how did you learn to weld? Thomas smiled. 4 weeks. January 1942. I was 21 years old. Had never welded before. but the government opened training programs. Free. And 4 weeks later, I was a welder. The first day, Thomas's voice trembled. I looked at a hull plate. 20 feet long, 1 inch thick. Steel. And the instructor said, "You're going to weld this plate to that plate. And your weld must be perfect. Because 71 men are trusting their lives to this weld." Thomas closed his eyes. I was terrified. Because I was just a kid. But I welded. 200 feet of weld. 8 hours. My hands shook. My eyes burned. But I finished. And then, Thomas opened his eyes. The inspector x-rayed it, tested my weld, and said, "Perfect. You're a real welder now." David Chen, a retired journalist in the room, approached. "Mr. Murphy, how many hours did you work each day?" 10 hours, Thomas said, "per shift. But there were 3 shifts. 24 hours. So the shipyard never stopped." Thomas described his first ship, SS Patrick Henry, September 27, 1941, Baltimore, America's first Liberty ship. "I wasn't on that ship," Thomas said, "but I saw it in the news." President Roosevelt gave a speech. "These ships," he said, "are the weapons of democracy." And people cheered. But Thomas's voice was hoarse. I knew the truth. These ships weren't weapons. These ships were salvation. Because every Liberty ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo. Tanks, planes, ammunition, food, medicine. And every ship, Thomas trembled, was 71 men's lives. The crew, young boys, 18, 19, 20 years old, crossing the Atlantic. U-boat attacks, storms, cold. Thomas walked to a photograph, on the wall, old, black and white. A Liberty ship, at sea, in the waves. "This," Thomas said, "is SS Richard Montgomery. August 1944. Torpedoed. U-boat. 56 men lost. 15 survived." Thomas touched the photo, his finger trembling. "I didn't weld this ship. But maybe I made a weld. On another ship. And that weld failed. And men died." No one in the room was speaking. "That's," Thomas whispered, "the welder's burden. 70 years. Every night. I wake up. And I think, did my welds hold? Or did I kill someone?" Marcus approached, offered water to Thomas. "Mr. Murphy, I'm sure your welds were perfect." Thomas shook his head. "Maybe. But I can never be sure. Because 847 ships, that's thousands of welds. And just one mistake. One mistake is 71 dead." Sarah asked, "Mr. Murphy, did you ever hear about a ship sinking that you welded?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Yes. 3 ships. All torpedoed. U-boats. But I don't know. Maybe the torpedo killed them. Maybe the ship was already weak. Weld failure. My failure." Thomas cried. 200 men. 3 ships. Dead. And I might have been responsible. Marcus knelt, put his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "No, you weren't responsible. U-boats were responsible. Nazis were responsible. But I made the welds," Thomas whispered. "And if I had done better, maybe they would have survived." A few minutes later, Thomas continued. 1943, he said. "The worst year. U-boat attacks peaked. We were losing 20 ships a week. And we worked faster. That year, Thomas's voice was strong. America built over 2,000 Liberty ships. In 1 year. That's 40 ships a week. At every shipyard, every shift, every worker knew. If we slowed down, people die." Thomas looked at Sarah. "Ms. Kim, you talked about robots. Efficiency. Speed. But in 1943, we weren't robots. We were humans. Tired. Scared. But we worked. Because there was no other choice." Sarah bowed her head, silently. For the first time, she understood the limits of robots. Thomas described his last ship, SS Benjamin Warner. August 1945, the last Liberty ship. "The war was over," Thomas said. "Germany surrendered in May, Japan in August, and we finished the last ship." Thomas smiled, through tears. "I made the last weld on that ship, August 15th, 1945, and when I finished, the instructor came and said, 'Congratulations. You won the war.' But Thomas's voice broke, I didn't win. 2,700 ships won. 1.7 million workers won. and 200,000 sailors. They risked their lives every day. On our ships, Thomas turned to the robots. Mr. Chen, your robots are impressive. But they've never carried 71 men's lives. They've never stayed awake at night because maybe a weld failed. Marcus couldn't answer. The following month, Marcus announced a new program, Legacy Welding Initiative. Young welders would learn from old veterans. Hand skills, precision, responsibility. Marcus gave a speech. Mr. Murphy taught me 3 things, he said. First, welding isn't just joining metal. It's saving lives. Second, speed matters, but quality is vital. Third, robots can never carry human responsibility. Thomas passed away 1 year later, at 95, at home. His old welding gloves beside him. The funeral was held at the shipyard. Thousands came. Marcus too. And World War II veterans, 50 of them, elderly but proud. A new monument was erected. Thomas Murphy, 1921 to 2024 welder, Liberty ships 1942 to 1945, 847 ships. Thousands of welds. Millions of lives saved. Now it's your turn. This story of Thomas Murphy reminds us that the greatest generation didn't just win battles on foreign shores. They won them in factories, shipyards, and assembly lines across America. 1.7 million workers, many of them learning their trades in just weeks, built 2,710 Liberty ships that carried the tools of victory across 2 oceans. Who built the world you live in? Maybe it's the construction workers who built your home, the factory workers who made your car, the welders, electricians, plumbers who keep modern life running. We live in a world increasingly automated, where manual labor is often dismissed as just welding, just building, just working with your hands. But Thomas's story reminds us, there's no just about it. Every weld carried 71 lives. Every ship carried victory. Tell us in the comments below. Share the manual laborers in your life who deserve recognition. Let's honor the people who built and continue to build the world with their hands. And if this story moved you, hit that like button to honor Thomas and all 1.7 million shipyard workers of World War II. Subscribe to Echoes of Valor for more untold stories of the home front. Share this with someone who works with their hands and needs to hear they're building something that matters. Tomorrow, we have another story from the war that was won in factories. One that will remind you that heroism doesn't always happen on battlefields. Sometimes it happens on assembly lines, working 24/7 to build victory. Until then, remember Thomas's words, I wasn't just welding. I was building victory. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for honoring the 1.7 million workers who prove that wars are won not just with soldiers, but with welders. We'll see you in the next story.